We made a point of checking in with each other, of sharing our worries and hopes, no matter how small. We talked about the future, about retirement, about traveling, about what we wanted our next chapter to look like. The conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes old fears resurfaced, and we had to remind ourselves to be patient, to give each other grace. One Saturday, we invited Emily and Sam over for dinner. The house was filled with laughter and the smell of Julia's famous lasagna. After dinner, as we sat around the table, Emily asked us about the hardest part of marriage. Julia glanced at me, then answered. The hardest part is learning to trust again after it's been broken. But it's also the most important part. You have to choose to trust every day. I nodded. And you have to be willing to forgive, not just each other, but yourself. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we move forward. Sam listened, nodding thoughtfully. It sounds scary. It is, Julia said, smiling, but it's also worth it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Julia and I sat by the fire, the house quiet around us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. We're going to be okay, aren't we? She asked. I kissed the top of her head. We already are. As I watched the flames dance in the fireplace, I felt a deep sense of peace. We'd faced our fears, our secrets, and come out stronger. The road ahead wasn't certain, but I knew we'd walk it together. One step, one day, one honest conversation at a time. Spring crept in slowly, melting the last traces of snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Julia's garden came alive again, and with it, a sense of renewal settled over our home. I watched her from the kitchen window as she knelt in the dirt, coaxing life from the soil with the same patience and care she'd shown in rebuilding our trust. There was something healing about the rhythm of the seasons, the way life insisted on moving forward, no matter what had come before. One Saturday morning, Julia invited me to join her in the garden. I hesitated at first. Gardening had always been her domain, her sanctuary. But she smiled and handed me a pair of gloves, and I found myself kneeling beside her, my hands in the earth. We worked in companionable silence, planting new flowers, pulling weeds, sharing the quiet satisfaction of creation. It felt good to build something together, to see the results of our labor take root and grow. As we worked, Julia told me about her plans for the garden, where she wanted to plant roses, how she hoped to attract more butterflies this year. I listened, really listened, and realized how much I'd missed these moments. The simple act of being present, of sharing in her joy, felt like another step toward healing. Later that afternoon, we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and admiring our handiwork. Julia leaned back in her chair, a contented smile on her face. "Thank you for helping today," she said. "It means a lot." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you asked. I want to be part of your world, all of it." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "I want that too. No more secrets, no more walls." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the trees. I thought about how far we'd come, about the work it had taken to rebuild what we'd almost lost. It hadn't been easy. There were still moments of doubt, still shadows that lingered at the edges. But each day, we chose to trust, to forgive, to move forward together. A few weeks later, Julia suggested we host a family barbecue. It had been years since we'd had everyone over, and the idea filled me with both excitement and anxiety. But Julia was determined, and soon our backyard was filled with laughter, the smell of grilled food, and the sound of children playing. As I watched our family gather, Emily and Sam, Julia's sister, our neighbors, I felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who mattered most, the ones who had stood by us through every storm. I realized that the secret Julia had kept, while painful, had ultimately brought us closer. It had forced us to confront our fears, to have the hard conversations, to choose each other again and again. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Julia and I sat on the porch, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. "We did it," she whispered. "We made it through." I kissed her forehead, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my chest. We did, and I wouldn't trade any of it, not even the hard parts. They made us who we are. She smiled, her eyes soft. I love you, David. I love you too, Julia, more than ever. As the stars appeared overhead, I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, stronger, deeper, more resilient than before. It took work, it took courage, but it was worth every effort. We had faced our fears, our secrets, and come out the other side, together. Summer arrived with a burst of color and energy, the days stretching long and golden. Julia's garden flourished, a riot of blooms and butterflies, and our home seemed to hum with new life. We found ourselves busier than ever, hosting friends for dinner, taking weekend trips to the lake, even joining a local book club together. It was as if, after all the years of routine and quiet distance, we were rediscovering each other and the world around us. One evening, after a particularly lively book club meeting, Julia and I walked home hand in hand. The air was warm, the sky streaked with the last light of day. We talked about the book, about the people we'd met, about how good it felt to be part of something new. I realized how much I'd missed this, sharing experiences, making memories, building a life that was more than just the sum of its parts. As we reached our front porch, Julia paused, turning to face me. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If I'd never told you about the account? If the bank hadn't called?" I nodded, the question lingering between us. "I do. Sometimes I wonder if we would have just kept drifting, letting the distance grow. Maybe we would have found our way back eventually, or maybe we wouldn't have. I'm glad we didn't have to find out." She smiled, relief and gratitude mingling in her eyes. "Me too. I never want to go back to that place, not with you." We sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the yard. The conversation turned to the future, retirement, travel, the possibility of grandchildren. We talked about the things we wanted to do, the places we wanted to see, the memories we still hoped to make. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright, full of possibility. A few days later, Emily called with exciting news. She and Sam were engaged. Julia squealed with delight, and I felt a surge of pride and happiness. We invited them over to celebrate, and the house was soon filled with laughter, stories, and plans for the wedding. As I watched Julia and Emily huddled together, poring over bridal magazines, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Our family had weathered its storms, but we were stronger for it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Julia and I sat in the quiet, the echoes of laughter still lingering in the air. She reached for my hand, her touch gentle and sure. "Thank you," she said softly, "for forgiving me, for choosing to trust me again." I squeezed her hand, my heart full. "Thank you for coming back to me, for letting me in." We sat in silence, the weight of the past finally lifting. I realized that trust wasn't just something you gave once and forgot about. It was something you chose every day in 1,000 small ways. It was in the way you listened, the way you forgave, the way you showed up, even when it was hard. As summer wore on, Julia and I continued to grow, together and as individuals. We took up new hobbies, explored new places, and made a point of checking in with each other, no matter how busy life became. The secret that had once threatened to tear us apart had become a catalyst for change, a reminder of the importance of honesty, vulnerability, and love. One evening, as we watched the sun set over the garden, Julia turned to me, her eyes shining with hope. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she asked. I smiled, pulling her close. "We already are." As the days grew shorter and the first hints of autumn crept into the air, Julia and I found ourselves reflecting more often on the journey we'd taken. The secret savings account, the shock of discovery, the long, sometimes painful conversations, it all felt like a distant storm now, the kind that leaves the world washed clean and sparkling in its wake. We had come through it changed, not just as a couple, but as individuals. There was a new steadiness in our partnership, a quiet confidence that came from having faced the truth and survived. One Saturday morning, we sat together at the kitchen table, sorting through paperwork for Emily's upcoming wedding. Julia was making lists, her handwriting looping across the page, while I checked off tasks on my phone. The old tension that used to hover over money and planning was gone, replaced by a sense of teamwork. We laughed about the chaos of wedding preparations, the endless decisions about flowers and food and seating charts. It was a joyful kind of busy, the kind that reminded us how far we'd come. Later that afternoon, Julia suggested we take a walk through the neighborhood. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the trees in shades of gold and red. As we strolled, we talked about the future, about what it would be like to be empty nesters, about the trips we still wanted to take, about the possibility of downsizing to a smaller house. There was no fear in these conversations, only excitement and curiosity. We had learned to trust each other again, to share our hopes and worries without holding back. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Julia turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you remember the day the bank called?" she asked. I nodded, the memory still vivid. "I do. I remember feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet." She smiled, a little sadly. "I was so afraid, David. I thought I'd ruined everything. But now, looking back, I think it was the best thing that could have happened to us." I reached for her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her fingers. It forced us to be honest, to really see each other. I wouldn't trade that for anything. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the neighborhood drifting around us, the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of children playing, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I realized that life would always have its challenges, its moments of doubt and fear. But as long as we faced them together, with honesty and love, we would be okay. A few weeks later, Emily and Sam's wedding day arrived. The house was filled with family and friends, the air buzzing with excitement. Julia looked radiant, her eyes shining with pride and happiness. As I watched her dance with Emily, I felt a surge of gratitude for the life we'd built, for the love that had endured, for the second chance we'd given each other. That night, after the last guest had gone and the house was quiet again, Julia and I sat together in the living room, holding hands. We talked about the day, about the future, about the lessons we'd learned. We promised each other, once again, to keep talking, to keep listening, to never let fear or pride build walls between us. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the ways our story could have ended differently. I was grateful for the call from the bank, for the secret that had forced us to confront the truth. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. We had found our way back to each other, stronger and more in love than ever. The weeks after Emily's wedding felt like a gentle exhale, a long-awaited pause after months of anticipation and change. Julia and I found ourselves alone in the house again, the rooms quieter but filled with a new kind of peace. We spent our evenings reminiscing about the wedding, laughing over small mishaps and reliving the joy on Emily's face as she started her new life. There was a sense of accomplishment, of having weathered something significant, not just the wedding, but the journey that had brought us here. One evening, as we sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, Julia turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what you would have done if you'd found out about the account in a different way? If it hadn't been the bank, but something else?" Quote. I considered her question, letting the silence stretch between us. I think I would have been hurt no matter how I found out. But maybe I wouldn't have understood as much. The way it happened forced us to talk, to really listen. It made me realize how much I'd taken for granted. She nodded, her gaze distant. "I was so afraid you'd see it as a betrayal, but now I see it was fear that kept me silent, not a lack of love." I squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of her words settle between us. We both made mistakes, but we also made choices. To forgive, to trust again, that's what matters. The next day, Julia suggested we go through some old boxes in the attic. We spent the afternoon sorting through forgotten treasures, letters from our early days, drawings the kids had made, souvenirs from trips we'd taken. Each item was a piece of our story, a reminder of the life we'd built together. As we worked, we talked about the future, about the things we still wanted to do, the places we hoped to visit. That night, as we sat by the fire, Julia pulled out her old notebook, the one where she'd tracked her secret savings. She handed it to me, her eyes shining with trust. "I want you to have this," she said. "It's part of our story now." I took the notebook, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was more than just numbers and notes. It was a symbol of how far we'd come, of the trust we'd rebuilt. I placed it on the shelf beside our wedding album, a reminder that even the hardest chapters could lead to something beautiful. As autumn deepened, Julia and I settled into a new rhythm. We made plans for the holidays, talked about inviting friends over, and even started looking at travel brochures for a long-awaited trip to Europe. There was a sense of possibility, of hope for the future. We knew there would be challenges ahead, but we faced them with a new sense of unity. One evening, as we watched the first snowflakes fall, Julia turned to me, her eyes bright. "I'm glad we found our way back to each other," she said. "I'm glad we didn't let fear win." I smiled, pulling her close. "Me too, Julia, me too." The house was quiet, the world outside hushed by the falling snow. I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not by pretending the past hadn't happened, but by choosing, every day, to move forward together. We had faced our fears, our secrets, and come out the other side, stronger and more in love than ever. The first real snow of winter arrived overnight, blanketing the neighborhood in a soft, silent white. Julia woke before me, as she often did, and I found her standing at the window, watching the flakes drift down. She looked peaceful, almost childlike, her breath fogging the glass. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, and for a moment we just stood there, two figures in the quiet morning, watching the world transform. "Do you remember our first winter here?" she asked, her voice gentle. "We got snowed in for 2 days. The kids built a fort in the living room, and we made pancakes for dinner.